Being home alone should be the most peaceful time, but for many, that's when the walls start to talk. When every creak of the floor sounds like a step, and every shadow seems to have intentions of its own. Today, I bring you 3 stories of people who thought they were alone, until they realized something was watching them from the most mundane corners of their homes. Make sure to lock your door tight, because after this, you'll want to check under your bed. I have always been a meticulous person, almost obsessive. When I moved out on my own, my biggest fear wasn't ghosts, but intruders. That's why, every night before bed, I follow the same routine. I check the windows, turn off the gas, and double lock the front door. Hearing that metallic double clack is the only thing that allows me to close my eyes and rest. One night, during a heavy rainstorm, I did my usual round. I distinctly remember turning the key and putting the security chain on. I went to bed, but around 3 a.m., a blast of cold air woke me up. My bedroom is at the end of the hallway, far from the entrance, but the draft was so strong that my bedroom door slammed shut. I got up, confused, thinking I might have left a window open due to the heat. I walked down the dark hallway, guided by my phone's light. When I reached the living room, I froze. The front door was wide open. Not just unlocked, but wide open, letting the rain and wind pour in freely. The security chain hung inert, as if I had never put it on. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but there were no wet footprints on the floor, no signs of forced entry on the lock. With my heart in my throat, I closed the door again, this time triple locking it, and watched from the couch with a kitchen knife in my hand. 20 minutes of absolute silence passed until I heard something that chilled me to the bone. It didn't come from outside, but from inside the apartment. A metallic sound, rhythmic and familiar, the sound of a key slowly turning in my door's lock from the inside. I remained paralyzed on the couch, my gaze fixed on the doorknob. The sound didn't stop. I clearly heard the bolt mechanism give way, one turn then another, and finally the third clack. The door opened again, slowly, a few centimeters, just enough to reveal the darkness of the outer hallway. My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped the knife. There was no one there. I didn't see a hand, I didn't see a shadow, just the mechanical movement of a lock opening by itself. I gathered my courage and rushed to slam the door shut. But this time, I didn't use the key. I pressed my weight against the wood and put the security chain on. As I leaned my back against the door, I felt a vibration from the other side. They weren't hard knocks. It was a soft scratching, as if someone was dragging their nails across the wood right at the level of my head. And then, a voice that sounded exactly like mine whispered from the other side, "Thanks for letting me in." Panic made me back into the kitchen, but looking down at the floor, I saw something that took my breath away. There were barefoot, wet footprints leading from the entrance, but they didn't go towards my bedroom. They headed directly toward the hallway closet, which was now slightly ajar. I realized that when I first found the door open, it wasn't because someone wanted to come in. It was because something that was already inside wanted to make me believe it had just arrived. I spent the rest of the night locked in the bathroom with the light on. At dawn, I checked the closet. It was empty, but on the inside of the door, there were deep, fresh claw marks. I moved out that very weekend. Even today, in my new house, I get up several times at night to check the lock. Sometimes, I find the key turned once, and I don't know if it's my paranoia or if that thing moved with me, waiting for the moment I forget to make that last turn. I live in a suburban area where houses are separated by wide gardens. My kitchen has a huge window overlooking the backyard. At night, that glass becomes a perfect mirror due to the darkness outside and the light inside the kitchen. It has always given me a slight chill, but that night was different. I was washing dishes around 11:30 p.m. As I lathered my hands, I looked at my reflection in the glass. I could see my face, the countertop, and the pantry door behind me. But then, I noticed something strange in the reflection. In the upper corner of the glass, where the darkness of the yard should be, there was a hand. A pale hand, with fingers that were too long, pressed firmly against the glass from the outsides. I froze, water running. I didn't want to turn round immediately, for fear of what I would see. I thought if I didn't move, that thing wouldn't know I had seen it. But then the hand began to slide down, leaving a trail of mist on the glass. That's when I realized something terrifying. In the reflection, the hand was touching the glass, but when I looked at the actual, physical glass, there was nothing. The glass was clean on the outside. The hand only existed in the reflection. I felt a pit in my stomach. I turned off the faucet and very slowly turned my head towards the yard. No one was there. The garden was deserted and silent. I sighed in relief, thinking it was a trick of the light, until I looked back at the window's mirror. In the reflection, there was now a face pressed against the glass, right behind where I was standing, and its eyes, empty and dark, were fixed on the back of my neck. The worst part was that, in the reflection, that thing had already started to open the window. Panic paralyzed me. In the real world, the window was closed and the garden empty, but in the reflection, the wooden frame slid upward with a creak I couldn't hear, only see. That figure, with greyish skin and spasmodic movements, was crossing the threshold. What terrified me most was the dissonance. I felt the warm air of my kitchen, but in the reflection, the curtains were flapping from an icy wind coming from outside. I ran to the switch and turned off the kitchen light, thinking that without light, there would be no reflection, and thus the figure would disappear. I stood in the dark, listening to my own ragged breathing. For a minute, there was silence. But then, I began to hear a dripping sound. Plop, plop, plop. It came from the floor, right behind me. I turned on my cell phone flashlight and pointed it at the floor. No one was there, but on the white tile floor, there were fresh mud and water stains, as if someone had walked in from a rainy garden. The footprints were strange, long, slender, and ending in claws. I followed the trail with the light and saw that the footprints stopped right in front of the window. Shining the light on the glass, I saw that the mist from the hand was still there, but now it was on the inside. That thing didn't come from the garden. It came from the reflection itself. It had swapped places with me. I ran out of the kitchen screaming and locked myself in my bedroom, but when I passed the hallway mirror, I stopped dead. My reflection didn't follow me. In the mirror, my figure stood still in the hallway, looking towards the kitchen in terror, while the greyish shadow placed a hand on my shoulder in the world of the glass. I spent the night awake, and today, although I am in the real world, every time I pass a shiny surface, I notice that my reflection moves a millisecond after me, as if it is learning to imitate me to come out again. I like background noise. I live in a small apartment, and absolute silence makes me nervous. So I always leave the television on a news channel or old movies before falling asleep on the couch. One night, a flicker in the light woke me up. The screen was black, with that greyish static and the constant hiss of no signal. I reached for the remote to turn it off, but just before pressing the button, the static changed. The movie image didn't return. Instead, the screen showed a black and white, grainy shot of a living room. It took me a few seconds to realize it was my own living room. I could see the couch, the coffee table, and myself sitting there, remote in hand. My first thought was that I had been hacked, or that someone had installed a hidden camera. But something wasn't right. The camera angle. The shot came from the upper corner of the ceiling, right behind the television. It was physically impossible. For that shot to exist, the camera would have to be floating in mid-air or coming directly from the screen. On the TV, I saw myself slowly getting up. In real life, I was petrified, not moving a single muscle. But on the screen, my video self was already standing, walking towards the camera with a smile that stretched from ear to ear. The most terrifying thing happened when that version of me on the screen stopped and pointed towards the dark corner that was just to my right. In real life, in the video, in that corner, there was a tall, faceless figure waiting in the shadows. In my living room, I saw nothing. Yet, I stared at the screen, unable to turn my head towards that corner of my own living room. On the television, the tall figure began to move, emerging from the darkness and approaching my video self. The strangest thing is that there was no sound, only the hiss of the static, but I could feel a glacial cold emanating from the screen, as if the television were an open window to a freezer. In the image, the figure placed a long, grey hand on my shoulder. At that precise instant, I felt a real weight on my right shoulder, a cold, heavy weight. I dropped the remote control, and the sound of it hitting the floor seemed to break the spell. On the screen, my video self reacted to the noise, but didn't look down. It looked directly at me through the glass of the television and moved its lips, saying, "Run." I didn't hesitate. I dashed towards the front door, but before leaving, I made the mistake of looking one last time at the television. The image was no longer of my living room. Now it showed the inside of the television, an infinite grey space, and I was in there, pounding on the glass from the other side, screaming soundlessly. The faceless thing stood behind my trapped version, holding me tightly. One managed to get out of the building and spent the night in a hotel. The next day, I returned with a friend. The television was off, but when I tried to turn it on, it didn't work. The internal circuits had melted, as if it had suffered a massive overload. I sold everything and moved, but there's something that keeps me from sleeping sometimes. When I pass by a turned-off screen or a computer monitor, for a brief second, I see my own reflection sitting on that couch, in that old living room, waiting for someone to turn on the static channel again. After hearing all this, are you still so sure you're alone in your room? Sometimes, danger doesn't come from outside, but from the spaces we believe are safe. If you've ever felt someone watching you while you sleep, or found an open door you swore you'd locked, tell me your experience in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more sleepless nights. And remember, check your reflection before turning off the light.